Hi guys. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you guys today about enhancing user experience, or rather usability. And you might have also heard this as described as human factors as well. Don't let anyone tell you that those are two different things. Usability and human factors are exactly the same. And really there's two sides to this. On one side is that there's the compliance and regulatory side of usability, and the other side is more commercially driven and creating satisfactory interactions in our products. That why are people going to use our products and love them, and just creating some really pleasing interactions. And so I'm just going to share with you some thoughts and considerations and ideas of things to bear in mind to try and design products with better interactions. And that's all usability is really. It's just the quality of interaction between people and products. That's all it is. As I said, my name's Nick Chubb, so I'm the design director at IDC. So we're a full-service product design consultancy. We actually turned 50 years old this year. Yeah, we celebrated our 50th birthday this year. Celebrated that 2 weeks ago, actually. So in that time, loads of different types of products, and I suppose loads of different types of interactions across those products as well, both physical and digital. So that could be quite complex electromechanical systems that are used in open surgery and vascular surgery and orthopedic surgery. That could be, this is an ophthalmoscope that an optician uses to look inside your eye. That could be coffee machines for Mars, drug delivery devices, or barbecues and pizza ovens. So it's quite a wide spread of different types of interactions there. One of the first things with user experience and designing better interactions is use errors and understanding what they are. So notice how it doesn't say user error, it's use error. And what we really want to do when we're approaching our projects is a use error is any scenario where the outcome is different from the intention. If you're interacting with a product and you think, okay, I'm going to use this interaction here, and I believe it's going to do this thing, and you press it and it does something else and it was a bit of a surprise, that would be a use error. And so with use errors, we're just trying to eradicate them. And so some use errors could be just slight annoyances, and others could cause serious harm or death in their sort of most significant state. So we want to eradicate use errors where we can. Another thing to bear in mind is we can't be committed to the current format of what we're dealing with. And this is one of those things where that people know, but just because you know it, are you doing it? And if you're doing it, could you be doing it better? And so we've got to let the solutions in our projects just be completely driven by insight and context and research, and to kind of have that even half fixed to some extent before you go into it is just not going to lead to kind of optimally created products and experiences. So we need to truly create the space to let that breathe and let it be driven by the right things rather than kind of tame it or have it driven by notions of previous things that already exist. So this is an example of a project at IDC. This was for Vena Medical. This is a video laryngoscope. So this is where a surgeon will do what's called endotracheal intubation, where they need to get a good look at your larynx or your vocal cords or any other part of your larynx. And so this was an example where the user experience was just completely prioritized as part of the entire creation of the project. So how most video laryngoscopes work is the surgeon would be inserting this down the person's throat, but they're having to look at a screen that's off to the side as they're doing it. This was actually the first video laryngoscope of its type that built a feedback loop of video right onto the device. So there's quite a technical electromechanical connection there. And so it means that in the line of sight of the operation that they're doing, they can see what's going on with the camera at the end of it. And so this was the end product there. This is another project. This was the ophthalmoscope for a company called Vizio. So some interactions can be more nuanced if it's a more mature product category. it might be more nuanced improvements and enhancements. So, for instance, where the optometrist has to grip the device and their ability to use that dial, sometimes interactions will be, it'll come down to one control or one element might make up 80% of the experience with that product. If you think about playing Xbox or PlayStation, if you have a glitch, then that almost trumps every single other thing. It doesn't matter how kind of comfortable the controller is to use. If you're getting glitches while you're playing, so it becomes way more significant. And so with this product, this main dial that you can access on both sides is as significant as that in terms of how pleasing that is to use. So it's a joint collaboration between mechanical and industrial designers to make that dial incredibly easy to use. I suppose to describe what that would look like as a bad interaction would be you're trying to go one increment, but actually it skips forward 3, and then you want to come back 2, but you end up coming back 4 or going back 1. So it's a joint venture between the industrial designers and mechanical engineers to make these enhancements. And so there was various kind of ergonomic improvements and other interactions improved as part of that development. This is a diagram you would have seen 100 times. And so we've obviously got desirability and human needs. We've got technical feasibility and commercial viability. One consideration in an attempt to design products with better interactions is just as a thought exercise, just to ignore feasibility and viability to begin with. It's not saying as part of the whole thing, just to begin with, so that we can identify the ideal user experience. If we never do that and just let our minds wander to what the ultimate experiences be, you won't reach the height of experience that you can, in my opinion and my experience. If you're trying to consider this at the same time as these two, a lot of the time it'll just limit where your mind will go to. Whereas if you can identify the ideal and then introduce the feasibility and viability and work backwards from there, it will normally ensure that what you end up with is at a higher point. It also means that maybe there are ideas that when you take this approach, the ultimate user experience that you identified might not be possible. It might not make sense from a kind of cost point of view. But at least you now know, if you were really championing your brand, at least you now know that if that does make sense from a cost point of view in 2 years, at least you've already identified the experience that you should be striving for anyway. Another thing to bear in mind is just to consider every stakeholder. And when we say stakeholder, we don't just mean those who are sort of financially invested in the project, but just anyone who is affected by the success or failure of the design. And so that could be who has to sell it, who has to clean it, who does the product get sent back to maintain the product. And so every single person who has any touch point with the product needs to be considered, because each of those people have their own interactions with the product. The person who has to maintain the product and the person who works in the servicing department needs as much thought as what you might consider the primary user if this is going to truly be a better product from a user experience point of view. So it's just opening our minds to the true scale of what our users are. Another one's a really important one is to map out the experience journey for our project. So we could do that in terms of the person, put the person at the center of that, and their experience of going through, of what does their day look like when they might interact with this product, and do it from a person-centric point of view. And then at the same time, we want to do it from a product-centric point of view. So let's a day in the life of the product, not just a day in the life of the user. And so the reason this is so important is that it's a proactive step. There's some projects where the program is dictating a pace of project that sometimes it's not healthy. And I've seen it in different businesses where it's kind of getting late into development process, certain issues are arising, and then you end up firefighting. And so if you only ever try to solve usability issues when they arise in a development, what you're not doing is giving yourself the opportunity to see every single issue and zoom out, which is why it's this proactive step, really important step at the beginning, because that's the thing that will present the opportunity to simplify. And you can't do that if you don't see all of the issues at one point when you've zoomed out. So this one's a really important step, because one thing will normally impact another. And so if it's only ever a game of whack-a-mole as part of a development process of one usability issues arise, bang, we've solved that, rather than thinking about them all at the same time from a bird's eye view, it just leads to better products. So another thing to do is to consider all human sensors and their limitations as well. So as part of let's say it's a medical device used in surgery, for instance, or even any product really, we need to think about visibility. So if there is a feedback loop based on one action within a product, is the indication or the feedback back to the user, is it visible enough? So whether that's an LED or something on a touch display, is that being presented appropriately enough to know? And if it's not, I was using an HP print. I'm a firm believer that nothing really ever needs printing, but I ended up using an HP printer yesterday that had no display on it. Quite a challenge to figure out how to actually use that, even as a designer. And so I'm pressing buttons, didn't really know what they were doing. And then once I've pressed my button, what was the feedback back to me was through LEDs, not a display. It was quite hard to know. So that's a good example of visibility of what is it trying to tell me. Another one is in terms of hearing. We need to realize that interactions, even something like the volume of an alarm on a medical device, should be a conscious decision. It's very easy to just slip into thinking, yeah, well, it's going to have that LED, or it's going to have this alarm. Well, what LED, what color, what size, what shape? If it is an alarm, what volume is that at? And we need to consider what is the environment that that product is being used in, what's the decibel level most commonly in that environment, and who exactly is our target demographic that's going to use the product? Are they elderly people who are going to be hard of hearing? So there's all sorts of context and environment that needs to be considered as part of every single interaction. And there's probably more interactions that require conscious decisions than we perhaps think. And if we take this further, not just human sensors, but things like memory, the quality of someone's memory, maybe dexterity, their cognitive level. This is a really important one, is what is their knowledge of similar products to the one you're using? Because sometimes you can make the mistake of doing user feedback with people, but they're not actually the target demographic. So if I'm developing a medical device, even though I could explain to you what it does and get your thoughts on it, is perhaps not as valid as you might think, because you might say, oh, well, this thing isn't very intuitive. However, if I handed it to any one of 100 people who are the actual target demographic, all of them might have some existing knowledge, and we need to tune into what that existing knowledge is, because we can piggyback on the back of it. So that product knowledge one is a really important part. And all of this just goes into the melting pot of what to consider to design better interactions. This is my favorite slide. I'm not going to sort of challenge anyone to tell me where that is, but this is just a good example of some of the tools that are available to designers to improve our interactions further as well. And so in terms of the landing gear lever for a pilot, in terms of a cockpit, we actually use shape codes and just stick a wheel on the end of it. And so sometimes there are quite simple solutions to make things more intuitive. But I suppose the arsenal for a designer, this is an example of shape coding, but even just thinking about things like the level of resistance on a dial to let you know that that's the wrong way, but it's easier to go this way. That's just another example. But orientation cues, using universal symbols, color coding, setting limits, tactile feedback, all of these things also go into that melting pot of things we can use to make things more intuitive as well. And so all of that is kind of things to consider, and it's all in theory as part of the development process. But really, we became designers because we want to launch great products and real products for real businesses, real people, solving real problems, adding real value. So as part of that development process, we obviously need to be developing prototypes and testing products in the real world as well. So all these things, usability trials and reviews and interviewing people like the spares and repairs team within products and that stakeholder analysis, doing interviews, making it all real. None of this stuff wants to be theoretical. It all needs refining and iterating in the real world. And so that's my talk on user experience. I'll be hanging around after, but thank you very much.